Hello, everyone. My name is Jamison Gosselin, and I am the Chief Marketing Officer here at Elmcroft by Eclipse Senior Living. Welcome to this afternoon's webcast, 5+ Things to Know When Family Caregiving During the Holidays. We are thrilled to welcome you all to today's webcast and to be able to share some details with you. But first, let's go through a little bit about how this webcast platform works. So this webcast platform has 3 pieces to it. First is the visual, which hopefully because you're on the webcast, you see it. And then second is the audio, and hopefully you're hearing us. But the third most critical piece, once those 2 are achieved, is asking a question. So let's dive into the asking a question component. We'll be able to answer your questions towards the end of the webcast. However, during the webcast, if you wish to ask a question, there is an area at the lower right-hand side called Ask a Question. Hit that box, type in your question and submit it, and we will keep an eye on questions. And then when we get to the part of the Q&A section of this webcast, we'll ask a few of them. We won't be able to get to all questions today. However, we will look at every single question, and we will put together a resource at the end of the webcast that we'll provide sometime after Thanksgiving that people can access and look at and get more details. But we'll get to as many questions as we can, and we're thrilled to have the opportunity to answer your questions. So with that, let's dive into it. First, I'd like to introduce you to our all-star panel. And Sharon Roth Maguire is our Senior Vice President of Wellness, Care, and Quality. Sharon, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm happy to do that, Jamison. Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm Sharon Roth Maguire. As Jamison said, I'm a part of the Eclipse Senior Living team, and I'm so happy to be with you today and chatting with you about this very difficult topic. My background is I'm a geriatric nurse practitioner. I've been a GNP for over 30 years, and I've had the privilege of taking this journey with many clients and their families. I've also been privileged to teach at the university level. I've served as the president of a national nurse practitioner organization. I've published numerous articles and book chapters on topics related to geriatric care and dementia. And I've been in high-level positions in large health systems, being able to affect change in a positive way around topics related to memory care, quality, and numerous health-related concerns. More so than anything, I've been a family member myself. I am a family member and have taken this journey personally with older adult loved ones, and then supporting extended family members who have really, despite their intelligence and compassion, had struggles like many of us do when we're faced with some of these issues related to caring for our aging loved ones. But I'm super happy to be here with you today. Thanks, Jamison.
Thank you, Sharon. And also I'd like to introduce AJ Cipperly, our National Director of Memory Care here at Elmcroft. AJ?
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is AJ, and I had the privilege of supporting families and individuals living with various cognitive impairments for over 15 years now. And within those years, serving in different roles and capacities, from being in some life engagement, resident enrichment, life enrichment positions, to working for the Alzheimer's Association, providing support, education and training, and then leadership positions within the senior living industry, landing me here now with Eclipse at Elmcroft. And I am just so excited to be with you today, sharing some great information alongside my colleagues, Sharon and Jamison.
Thank you, AJ. And again, folks, my name is Jamison Gosselin. I am thrilled to be able to moderate this conversation around family caregiving during the holidays. I've worked for the past 17 years in and around senior living in a variety of roles, and have been so privileged to work with so many great people throughout those years. And you know, it's interesting during these times with the holidays coming up, and obviously all of us living in a COVID world, so to say. there are a lot of struggles that I know so many people are dealing with out there. Last year, the National Alliance for Caregiving produced a statistic that said 34 million caregivers are providing care to a family member right now for someone that's over the age of 50. And of that number, about 16 million of those folks are caring for somebody with memory loss, whether it be Alzheimer's or dementia. So there are a lot of people out there probably walking in your shoes right now too. Each have very unique situations or individual circumstances, but all of them are working so hard to provide care and service to their loved one. And how would they deal with that, especially during this time of year? Somewhat gets a little more stressful because of what's going on out in the world today, but also within each of us. When we were preparing for this conversation, we were talking a lot about our own individual circumstances with family and how we have to manage that personally, even though professionally we're involved in senior care. And so it is an interesting webcast that I hope you all get good information out of. So there are 4 or 5 topics that we're going to be talking through today as it relates to family caregiving during the holidays. And it really gets down to some of the key pieces of information being, holiday expectations and the pressures that we put on each other. What we really are trying to accomplish as we're managing stress in our lives. The relationship dynamics, obviously with the holidays, people tend to get together. It might be a little bit more virtual this year, but siblings and spouses and adult parents and children and all this sort of stuff, all these people are getting together typically during the holidays. And those sorts of connections sometimes create interesting dynamics around the holiday table. And so we're going to talk a little bit about those dynamics, and especially as the primary family caregiver, what those sorts of issues are that are placed on somebody. The older adult, the senior themselves, whether it's your mom or your dad or your aunt or your uncle or whoever it is within the family that you're taking care of, what are they striving for? What's going on in their minds typically? And what are they trying to preserve as part of their independence and autonomy as much as they can hold on to as they are aging? And then lastly, it's really about increased awareness of care needs. And so how we go about accomplishing those sorts of things. So now I'm going to dive into the conversation. And the first area really goes into the holiday season and family caregiving. And so first, Sharon, this question is really going to be for you. But before that, I was alerted that we do have to provide a disclosure because this is a webcast, and that this information being provided within this webcast does not replace or substitute for medical or healthcare advice or information provided by your physician or other personal medical resources. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical or healthcare situation. And so now let's go into the conversation, Sharon. And so again, the holiday season and family caregiving. And, Sharon, the first question that I'd like to throw out to you is, how can caregivers manage expectations over the holidays? There's so many expectations, but how can they manage the expectations that, one, others might be placing on them? And then second, as a follow-up, the expectations that they as a family caregiver might be placing on themselves?
Yeah, those are great questions, Jamison. So first of all, I want to start with some important advice. Be kind, right? Be kind to yourself, be kind to those around you, and of course, be kind to your loved one. And while that may seem sort of obvious and some of you might be like rolling your eyes, that's such important advice because now more than ever, because of COVID, because of the impact this horrific disease has had on all of us. And of course, you add the holiday kind of expectations on top of that, we can easily have short fuses. And so it's very important that you take a step back, take a deep breath, count to 10 or 100 or 1,000, and just remember to be kind, right? So what are those expectations around the holidays in particular? It's supposed to be a time, filled with joy and, family moments that are memorable. There should be, gift giving and singing and cookie baking, and well, at least that's what the magazines and the commercials tell us, right? But in the midst of all that and the pressure to create a perfect holiday, we often are faced with some real challenges, and that might be the older adult that we love deeply and care for deeply is showing some signs of decline. And so you're faced with, creating this perfect holiday, but also responding to a loved one who may be experiencing physical or cognitive or emotional decline. I want to say a couple words about that before I get back to this, idea of expectations and juggling and balancing that. We know that when an older adult is socially isolated, like we all have been, and they have been during this pandemic, that they may experience some signs of this isolation, again, both physically as well as socially and emotionally. So physically, you may be surprised when you see your loved one, perhaps for the first time in a while, in person. They may have manifested some signs of weakness because they are not using their muscles as they often did. They're maybe not getting out and about as much. You may have uncovered that they have fallen during the time when you have not been able to be with them. They may be experiencing some emotional consequences of this isolation and be more depressed. And that may manifest itself by lack of self-care, or the house not being as clean as it was, or spoiled food in the refrigerator. And so I just want all of us to be mindful that COVID has impacted older adults greatly. And, of course, we hear about that in the news, that they're a high-risk population if they contract the disease. But what we don't hear enough about is what happens to older adults just because of isolation, right? And so you, as a loving family member, as you're reaching out during this time of the holidays, trying to create this beautiful experience, you may see these things in your loved one. And those are super important signs to take action on. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Let's go back to these expectations. So you as a caregiver, you want to create this wonderful holiday. You may have other obligations. You may have family obligations with children of your own. You may have work obligations. You're trying to maintain a work schedule, being on Zoom, all day, like many of us are. You may have community obligations, and you're balancing all that, and then you're balancing additional pressure to create that perfect holiday. And then you're trying to figure out what to do with mom or dad or the older adult loved one for who you are caring. And so that kind of sandwich generation scenario is quite common, and again, makes it a really challenging time for caregivers. We know that caregivers often feel overwhelmed, and one of the things I want to make sure you understand that these feelings of being overwhelmed are absolutely normal. In addition to feeling overwhelmed, you may feel a little guilty. You may feel angry. You may feel sad. And all of these are normal, and you should give yourself permission to feel those things. You should, however, begin to talk with someone about those feelings, because a lot of times we want to stuff those in and not give voice to them. But it's very important as a family caregiver to seek support, seek a sounding board, and talk about those feelings, because again, they are normal. There's no need to feel ashamed or embarrassed by those feelings. They're very real and they're very normal. Along those lines, taking care of yourself during this holiday period is so critical. There are numerous articles published in medical journals and social science journals about the stress of caregiving. And we know that one of the things that really does help, in addition to talking about these feelings with others, is taking good care of yourself. And again, you may be rolling your eyes thinking, how on earth am I going to fit that in? but it's so important that you take time to get some exercise. And even if that's just walking the dog, that's okay. Take some time to eat well, make some good food choices, take some time to get a little nap or a good night's sleep. So very important. So taking care of yourself as a caregiver will absolutely help with this stress you may be feeling and these pressures to have this, perfect holiday.
That's so true, Sharon. And AJ, kind of curious from your perception, with your focus on caring for those with memory loss, I think it becomes a little bit more difficult, especially during the holidays, as people are getting together, and everyone loves to reminisce about holidays past too. What are some things that family caregivers should be keeping in mind as part of whether keeping a right frame of perspective if their parent does have memory loss, including Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia?
Yeah, Jamison, thanks. So, that certainly adds to the challenge, right? So we do have some normal age-related changes that can often make it challenging, and then you add some cognitive impairment, memory loss to that. It definitely can change the way that holidays might look. And so some things that families can do, caregivers can do, and you're going to hear me say this a lot, is to prepare. The key is really good preparation. And so what that might look like is thinking about, what do we want the holiday season to be, and how is it still going to be special? How can we keep it special, and how can it still be advantageous for my loved one as well, and not be overwhelming? Because, like Sharon said, taking care of yourself as the caregiver is really important, because if you're stressed out and you're overwhelmed, your loved one is going to pick up on that, and they're also going to feel anxiety. They may not know why, but if you feel it, they're going to feel it. So taking care of yourself is key, but preparing in a way that's not overwhelming to you so you can maintain your sanity, but also preparing in a way that's going to involve your loved one. Maybe they're not able to do the same things that they used to do over the holidays, right? Mom used to prepare the entire Thanksgiving feast for all the family, and that was something that she was known for and something that she did and she loved to do, and every family member looked forward to coming over to her house to partake. But now this year things have changed, and her cognitive impairment has gotten worse, and she's not able to do that. And so you and your family may be fine, pitching in and taking over and cooking, but think about it from her perspective, right? What must that feel like to not be able to do that? And some ways that to continue to keep her involved is, what can she do? Instead of just thinking about, oh, what are they not able to do anymore? What is she still able to do? Maybe she can't cook the entire meal, but she can pull off grandma's traditional pumpkin pie recipe. Or maybe she can't do that, but you know what? She can be in the kitchen supervising and making sure you're doing it right? And if we have to be together virtually, we can share the experience of doing that together.
That's really important. And, it is interesting, AJ, as we have been thinking about the holidays in our own personal lives too, how to go about managing those sorts of circumstances. With COVID kind of present, Sharon, you had referenced this earlier. There's a lot going on in people's lives and trying to stay connected, but it's been so difficult, especially virtually. AJ, are there any tips that you could provide as it relates to how some of this can be accomplished virtually and maybe be a bridge to in-person connection as well? We're all starting to hear the orders coming out about, not getting together in groups and that sort of thing. And, so that makes things a little bit more difficult, I think, for everyone. But, are there some ideas about virtual ways that people can connect during the holidays that will still provide meaning and purpose as part of that connection between families?
Yeah, great question. Common one these days, right? So again, as you said, the key is how do we still make it special by minimizing the risk to everyone. So we have the technology, let's use it. And so thinking about, again, this concept of shared experiences, how can we may not be able to be together physically, but we can do the same things, maybe even virtually, and have the same experiences, so that when we do come together virtually, that's something we can talk about, right? So as I mentioned before, maybe we're both making, grandma's traditional recipe together while we're on FaceTime. Maybe we are, maybe you're trimming the tree at your house while I'm, trimming my own small tree in my place, right? And you're pulling out, the ornament that my, granddaughter made a couple of years ago, and we're reminiscing over the ornament and how wonderful it was. So, thinking about what are the things that we typically do together, and how can we make those virtual? So we may not be able to have an entire family gathering that's virtual, but what are the pieces of the family gathering that we could virtually connect with, right? So, for example, part of my family's tradition is, we certainly have the meal, but then we come together and there's the reading of the Christmas story from the Bible, there's a prayer, and then we have all the little kids open their gifts, right? So we may not connect virtually that whole entire time, because that's a several hour process. But what we could connect virtually to do, that the thing that would be important to me, I would want to virtually connect while we read the Christmas story together. And then I certainly want to watch virtually my little nieces and nephews open all of their gifts. That would be important to me too. So kind of pulling out those pieces of the gathering that are going to be important to your loved one and connect then. It might be a 15-minute, 20-minute, 30-minute virtual connection, and then there's a break, and then maybe connecting again later virtually for a different part of the gathering.
Yeah, and AJ, so those are great. And a couple of things you said that I just want to piggyback on. Connection. We all are starved for connection, right? And so that's a human need that we all have. And I think during the holidays, it's even heightened, in my opinion, again, just because of those expectations I spoke about. So let's think about ways to keep connection happening in a way that's palatable for caregivers and happy for the older adult loved one. And so manage expectations around that through the holiday season. It doesn't all have to be on one day. As a matter of fact, it's better if it's spread out during this beautiful holiday season. And so maybe as a family, you divide and conquer. You agree that maybe there's going to be a daily check-in or an every other day check-in. And, by the way, your older adult loved one may not want you to call them every day, right? They have a life too. And so it all depends where they are in their journey. But their autonomy, don't forget about that. They're very committed to being, strong, capable people. So we want to balance that part as well, but I digress. So make a schedule of these check-ins for these connection points, and they can be these beautiful things that AJ spoke about, or they can be simple nothings, as I call them. My daughter happens to live many states away from me, and while I'm not an older adult, although I'm getting closer all the time, I love these simple nothings, right? It's just a quick check-in to say, hi, how are you doing? Really no expectations about it at all, other than just to do that. They can be short and sweet, but you should have that dialogue with your loved one to see how often they may like to do that. So don't assume it's every day. Maybe it's only once a week. Maybe it's 3 times a week. What's the right balance? And then divide and conquer around these connections, okay? The other thing I wanted to piggyback on was this, again, COVID. Everything is around us all the time, COVID. So we do want to be mindful of that. If you are going to have an in-person visit, you do want to be mindful of those good precautions you can and should be taking. And so it's not a political statement, it's a health activity to follow this guidance around wearing masks, keeping distance, limiting time. If you're going to gather together, think about quarantining in advance of the time you are spending together. if you're not yet bought into the masks, you need to be, because your older adult loved one is at great risk. And so you do want to be wearing masks when you do make a visit. And so just be mindful that these in-person visits, they can happen, but they should happen safely, right? So if you're not familiar with the precautions, I'm happy to go over that, but I think most of us know what they are by now. But essentially, mask wearing is probably the most important one. And then just being mindful of the size of the gathering, how long the gathering occurs, keeping that physical distance, and then always, without fail, making sure you wash your hands. The nurse in me just had to say that.
What's the song you sing, Sharon, when you wash your hands?
Oh, I have a bunch of them, so you can pick your favorite, but make it fun, right? It's less burdensome, maybe.
That's right. That's right. So, out of curiosity, for gift-giving purposes, what would be the top gift that either of you would give to a family caregiver in today's holiday season? What do you think would be the best gift?
So, gift certificates are amazing. Gift certificates for various services, some pampering is always a good idea. A massage, getting nails done, getting hair done, gift certificates for respite care, gift certificates for prepared meals. So thinking about things that are going to free up that caregiver for them to be able to have some me time and some time to rest and restore and take care of themselves.
That's great. That's a great
opportunity. And for me, not everybody listening in obviously knows me, but those of you that do know me probably know what I'm going to say. I'm a big believer in person-centered approaches to life. And what that means is, we honor where people are, and we honor them by knowing them deeply as the person they are. And that may sound a little strange or maybe a little obvious to you, but it isn't always true in the way we live our lives. And so I like to talk about the hazelness of Hazel with this pretend, person named Hazel. And so I'd have to really know Hazel well to know what gift would meet her needs best. And that's super fun without overthinking it. But a simple example to AJ's comment about gift certificates, what is it that Hazel really enjoys that she may not be able to quite as much now because of her age or her dementia or COVID restrictions, that we could get her the special gift certificate for that special place, or maybe arrange a delivery of that special thing that she really enjoys. But I couldn't agree with AJ more. Things like that are usually a great gift. I also find that older adults, they typically don't want more stuff. So I try to avoid stuff, but some stuff is kind of fun for them. Like what? I know photos, framed photos can be very special. A booklet that grandchildren put together with their own artwork, or again, photos of the grandchildren, can be very, helpful and well received. And for most people, I don't know why it's such a winner chicken dinner, but those fleece blankets, I have never had anyone that I've given a fleece blanket to not love it. So there's just, of course, I live in the upper Midwest, that might be why, but fleece blankets are always a real plus.
Yeah, those are both good. I think the one that comes to mind for me the most is just, as seniors are embracing more technology, or even the family caregiver with the iPhone or a Google-based phone, the Droid phones, are apps, right? There's so many apps out there that do so many things. And, the one that I downloaded recently is Headspace, which is a great meditation app. And really, they do it in such creative ways, but there's so many out there. I mean, my grandmother with a phone, I imagine she'd love like one of the slot machine apps, so she can not have to be at the casino, but she can play the slot machine, and instead of being tuned in the TV all day long watching news about COVID, she can be on a casino app or something like that and have fun with that. So a lot of good apps out there. Yeah, a lot of good apps out there. Well, let's switch gears a little bit. So, we talked a little bit about, leading up to the holidays and how to create a great holiday experience, but let's get into the meat of it, which is really how do we navigate the holidays with our aging loved one, and the conversations that might have to be had around, family caregiving. I, as the family caregiver, know I'm providing all this care to my mom or my dad, or I'm starting to think about and seeing signs of them aging. I'm not quite sure if I want to bring that up to my older sister or younger brother yet. Are they seeing the same things as me? Is my spouse seeing the same things as me? Am I anticipating the types of things that I'm going to have to do to watch over my mom or my dad? And so, Sharon, when you think about some of the topics that we should start thinking about as family caregivers, what are some of those topics?
Sure. First of all, let's frame it in the context of it. Are the holidays the right times to be having these discussions? Certainly not in the middle of, reading that beautiful holiday book that AJ spoke about, but it may be the time to gently probe these topics. I also want people to be mindful that this conversation, or these kinds of conversations, are not one and done. They often have to occur and recur many times, because they can be very difficult for both parties, both the well-intentioned family caregiver as well as, and for the older adult themselves. So approach them with kindness, approach them gently in terms of the topics and the timing. So there's no need to get everything resolved at the holiday celebration. And it may not even quite be the right time to actually start it. It could be, though. You've got to look for the right opening. So sometimes the right opening is, more important than the right topic, right? And so you may cleverly begin a conversation by framing it in the context of, Mom, I saw a commercial for a service that helps you plan your will, I don't even have mine done. Do you have a will? Is yours up to date? Right? So you may frame it around a topic like that. Again, timing is everything. You have to be in the right space yourself, mentally and emotionally, to have that conversation. But if you've caught how I've framed that in the context of, oh, I saw something on TV about this topic and it made me wonder about myself. Or if there's an opening to have the opportunity to say, it could be true or it could be a little white lie, that, oh, one of my friends, their mom had a fall recently and this is what happened. And, it made me wonder about you and how you're doing. So those kinds of little openings are important. But what are the super important topics that you've got to have some discussion about at some time? Number one, I mentioned it a little bit in my little discussion here, is, does mom or dad or your older adult loved one, do they have a will? Do they have powers of attorney? Powers of attorney for healthcare and powers of attorney for finance. Now, if they've done any estate planning and they have a will, they usually do have those things designated. But I cannot emphasize how important that is, just in the context of healthcare decision-making and any other care decision-making that will involve potentially some costs to it. So those healthcare powers of attorney, both for finance and healthcare, are super important. And then, do they have a will? In addition to those things, it's not a pleasant topic, but we do want to know what our older adult loved ones' preferences are around end of life. If something happened, Mom, would you want us to put you on a ventilator? If your heart stopped, would you want us to take action to restart it? And again, very difficult topics, but so important to know. And in medical terminology, that's often called a DNR, a do not resuscitate order. Other states also have documents known as physician's orders for life-sustaining treatment. The acronym there is POLST, POLST. Sometimes they call it MOLST, medical orders for life-sustaining treatment. Sometimes it's simply called a living will. Now, each of those are slightly different, but that concept of what your older adult loved one wants to happen in those really difficult times, very, very important. And all of those are legal documents that require proper execution of those documents. You can use an attorney to do that. You can pull some of those documents offline. But it's really important that those types of things get clarified. And again, how do you start that conversation? Really, it's simply, Mom, I really am worried that I want to know the right thing to do should these things happen. And I know it's a difficult topic, but would you mind if we just took 5 or 10 minutes? And Mom might say, I don't want to talk about that, right? My own mother, God rest her soul. I've been a GNP for over 30 years. I've been a nurse even longer. And so you'd think I'd know how to do this, right? It was hard for my own mom when she was alive to have these kinds of topics discussed between us. And so over time, we sort of chiseled away at this, but I was gently and kindly persistent and looked for openings to have these discussions. But it's critical that you, as a loving, caring family caregiver, know about these documents, if they exist or not, and if they don't, to take action to create them. But again, lots of time needed for most people to have this important discussion. In addition to those legal things, you also want to eventually get to some point of discussion around, Mom, have you ever thought about if you did need care? What would that look like? And your mom might say to you, like my mom said to me, I'd rather be dead than live in a nursing home. Wow. What does that mean? What do you do with that? Okay, if that's true, then what are some options, right? Because you know what will happen then? You and your siblings, if you have siblings or others involved in the care of your older adult loved one, will sort of have to figure out, what does that look like, right? When you figure that out, you need to begin to decide, who should be included in this discussion? Who's going to be the family spokesperson? How do you keep each other informed, right? And how amongst all of you as, important and valued decision makers, how do you just keep each other in the loop? And how do you, I'm going to go back to my first statement, continue to be kind to each other, right? And then the last thing, in the context of all of these topics I've been describing here in the last few minutes, one of the things we can never forget is that this older person who we love still thinks of themselves as, a viable, valued individual, as they should, because they are. And so never forgetting that, they got to be wherever they are, age 80, 85 or older, being competent and capable. And so they hold on to that just so strongly. And we have to be mindful that even though they may make a decision that we don't agree with, it's their decision to make. And sometimes we think it's a bad decision, right? And so being patient with them, being kind with them, and working toward resolution of the issue is so important. So that was more than you probably asked, Jamison. I apologize, but as you can tell, I can talk about these things all day.
No, that's great, Sharon. Thank you very much. And AJ, I am kind of curious from your perspective, is especially for seniors with memory loss and how they're viewing themselves and what they're processing. Could you give us a little bit of the perception of a senior with memory loss and, what's going on with them as they're processing, potentially that they know that they're losing some of their memory and those sorts of things, just to give family caregivers a perspective of what might be going on the other side of the conversation as a senior who's experiencing memory loss is processing that.
Yeah, thanks, Jamison. So it's really important to try and put ourselves in their shoes. It's one thing to talk about, oh, well, this is just a part of, memory loss. But when we really try and imagine what it must be like to, know and be aware that, what, I'm not as sharp as I used to be. What, I am having trouble, when my granddaughter calls, I'm having trouble like thinking of her name or putting her face to her name, and oh my gosh, what's that be like? And so there's this fear there, and that fear often can sometimes translate into what we see, and it may manifest itself as anger or resistance to having some of these conversations that Sharon was talking about, right? And so, approach your loved one and talk about some of these things that you've identified. Mom, I noticed X, Y, and Z. Well, no, I don't want to talk about that. No, we're not talking about that right now. We'll talk about that later. So, that resistance to even having a discussion. And so a lot of times too, with cognitive impairment, so about half of the people will have an awareness of it and will manifest that awareness differently. And then the other half will not have an awareness and just, well, everything's fine, right? And so even somebody with awareness of their deficits can even, be in denial, right? Or just refuse to acknowledge, no, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not having any issues with my memory. Well, think about, what about you? The other day you did this, this, and this, all right? So they turn it back on you, right? If you point out something. And so again, it's really important to understand what they must be feeling from their perspective in order to know how to respond to that, right? And the key word there is respond, not react, because sometimes our loved ones can, surprise us by their reactions. And if we're not careful, we're going to react to that. And then what happens is we get in these arguments or, these, kind of very emotional discussions. And what's really, really key with cognitive impairment, with any type of dementia that somebody's going through, is your relationship with that person. Your relationship with them is the most important thing above everything else. And so you always want to be thinking about, how can I maintain this good relationship, this positive relationship, even if sometimes it means, I need to back off. You know what? I'm sorry, Mom, you're right. I shouldn't have brought that up again. I apologize. And then let's revisit it later.
That's great, AJ. Thank you very much for sharing. So we now are moving to the part of the conversation, the spouses and the siblings and the family caregiver have all acknowledged that mom needs some sort of help. And, how does that plan begin to come together, Sharon? Like, what are the pieces to the plan, and what's the research that the family needs to do to start uncovering what might be the right option for their loved one?
Yeah, right. That is the potential next step. So we know that there are many options out there. And if you have come to the collective conclusion, with your loved one and any of the other decision makers involved, you do want to think, what is that next step? And it runs the gamut. And this slide up here is, I jokingly called it the slide that ate New Jersey, because there are so many choices and it can be really overwhelming. I was just talking with a family caregiver of one of the residents from one of our communities, and they shared with me how challenging it was for them to understand all of the different types of terminology that are being used. And they're a very intelligent, person, but they just said, I get lost sometimes understanding, what's senior housing, what's assisted living, what's a residential care facility, what is respite care, what is, right? And so it's confusing even for people that are very intelligent and well-versed, and even people in the medical profession. One of my grown-up nieces, who is the oldest daughter of my oldest sister, who needed care. She was the spokesperson for the family, and she is the oldest of 5 children. And when my sister, her mom, needed care, she called me in tears one day, because even though, again, she's a very competent, capable health professional, she's a physical therapist, she said, "Aunt Sharon, I don't even know where to begin between all the different terms that are being thrown at us, the different choices, the different, structures of payment, the availability." She was literally beside herself. So you do have to begin somewhere, right? And so one of the great places to begin is the internet. Now you have to be careful because, Google doesn't always guide us in the perfectly correct direction, but you should begin, searching around names of types of care that may be in the potential future for your loved one. It can be home care. It could be more organized care. It could be more residential in nature, or it could be more medical and structured in nature. And again, there's sort of a continuum that you need to think about, because the good news is there are so many different types of care solutions that you will find that you can avail yourself of, but it should be the right fit at the right time. And of course, we often say less is more, right? We shouldn't have to go to the level of, for example, skilled nursing, if mom or dad are capable of doing many things on their own, but yet they need some help. And what is the nature of that help? Is it simple, reminders for services or care or medication assistance, or is it they actually need someone to do things for them? So again, it runs the gamut of where you can get those services and who can provide them, from the very simple in-home care to the very complex, skilled nursing scenario. Now, where to start truly? You can do some internet research, but you should ask around. And who can you ask? Ask some of your friends, your peers. They've likely been through it themselves. If they have not, ask your medical team. That means your primary care provider or mom or dad's primary care provider. They may have some recommendations for you. In addition, every county has an aging resource center, and the acronym is ADRC, and that stands for aging, and I forget what the D stands for. It'll come to me in a minute, but it's a resource center, and these are federally mandated, but they're funded by the state. And so you can begin your research at your county level and look senior services, and they can help guide you and often have wonderful information about the spectrum of services that are available. But it truly is finding that right place for your loved one, that they will feel comfortable and be able to get the care and services that they need. And again, those are really important discussions to have with them. But as you can see on this slide that ate New Jersey, there are many, many, many choices.
Thanks, Sharon. And AJ, one of the questions that we got relates to memory care communities and what makes them different, like what's going on inside a memory care community that might be different from other forms of care. Can you share a little bit about what might go on in a memory care environment?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I want to make people aware of is that it is more than just a secured door. Okay, it is not just about having a locked door. It's really about the support that is provided within that community. So people that work there are specially trained to support people living with cognitive impairment, to help provide not just a physical environment that's safe. I mean, safety is incredibly important, but also a safe emotional environment. And what that means is an environment where I'm set up for success, where I'm not going to walk around making mistakes all the time or being pointed out that I'm wrong about stuff, or, you know, redirected because I'm going in the wrong place all the time. I mean, if that is my life, I mean, how depressing is that, right? And so creating the safe environment and training people in a way that helps them support me and support the abilities that remain, instead of just focusing on all the things that I can't do anymore. And that really truly is the key, is certainly the safety piece, but not only physical safety, but emotional safety as well. And also providing too, I mean, so certainly a third thing I can't leave out is engagement, right? So it's not necessarily specific engagement for people with dementia. It's about, how do we take things that I like to do and adapt them for my current ability, right? So again, we're going back to that person-centered care that Sharon talked about, the hazelness of Hazel. So we're not going to just, you know, put some generic activities out there that people with dementia like to do. It's, what is AJ interested in doing? What does she want to get involved in? And then how can we make that something that she can be successful with? So that type of engagement is also very, very key in a memory care community.
Thanks, AJ. So we're going to move into our Q&A portion and take a couple questions. We have some questions already, but if people have additional questions, feel free to post them now. And our first question relates to, this is an interesting one, relates to basically the caregiver is asking, how do I deal with the seasonal changes going on? I've noticed that both me and my mom, as I'm caring for her during this time of year, are getting more, not necessarily agitated, but difficult. Things get more difficult for us during this time of year. And is there something going on, like because the sun isn't around as much, or whatever it might be?
So I can start, and I know AJ may have something to add, because certainly if your loved one has memory care issues, there are other things to consider. But I'll just take a stab at it, generally speaking. There's a phenomena, and I'm not saying that this question asker has this phenomena, but there is a well-documented medical condition known as SAD, Seasonal Affective Disorder, SAD. And it does have to do with this time of year when there's less light, fewer hours of light, and our body is responding to that lack of light. And there actually are some neurochemical changes in our brain that create these feelings of depression, and in fact, are a form of mild depression, right? And so it's not surprising that you may be feeling this way. Now, that's a medical diagnosis, and as we said at the beginning of the hour, I'm not here to make medical diagnoses. However, just be mindful that there is a real phenomena that may be occurring with you or within you. In addition, just aside from SAD, you know, we all sort of get kind of cocoonish, don't we, this time of year? And I mentioned earlier, I live in the upper Midwest, and so, you know, you definitely want to, you know, snuggle in when the winter winds are blowing, and you're less likely to go outside, and you probably are going to bed earlier because you're not as active as you maybe once were. So be mindful that there are real reasons why you may be feeling this way. And then you sprinkle in, as we started this conversation, with these holiday expectations. So what can you do is the real question, right? I would suggest that you try to do some of the strategies I described earlier. For example, get adequate sleep, get some form of exercise, even if that's chair-based exercises, or if you have some equipment in your home, or you can watch a video or use an app to do a simple exercise regimen. Make sure that you're getting enough sunlight as much as possible in any way that you can. And then, of course, there are, you know, all of the good health approaches that are described in some of the literature. by keeping your nutrition optimized, including making sure that your vitamin intake is adequate and that you have a great selection of fresh fruits and vegetables to get those vitamins in. But it's fairly common that you see people sort of cocooning. I love I believe it's the Scandinavians' approach to this time of year called hygge. And if you don't know about hygge, and it's spelled, I probably will spell it wrong. It's either Hygge or Higge, but it's a Scandinavian word, and they embrace this time of year, and they look forward to using things like drinking lovely, warm, honeyed teas and reading books and really embracing this darkness and this more cold climate. But it's something you should be mindful of in terms of if it gets to a point where you're feeling more despondent and you're really withdrawing and you're crying all the time, that's a different phenomena, right? That you need to get some help for, okay? AJ, if you want to comment on some of the memory care issues, maybe.
I think you covered the seasonal things. I mean, an issue with, somebody living with some memory impairment or cognitive impairment, maybe what we call, or maybe the term you've heard of, sundowning, right? So typically towards the end of the day, a person with dementia may become more confused or may, become more agitated or have some behavioral expressions that typically they didn't in another part of the day. So there's a lot of theories about why that happens. I truly believe it's a combination of all of them, including sunlight, daylight. I know Sharon mentioned that, but I can't stress enough, and there's a lot of research out there that demonstrates that getting fresh air and sunlight every day can minimize those behavioral expressions that we often call sundowning. It also has a lot to do with being tired, right? So just not getting rest throughout the day. And it's not necessarily a physical tiredness as much as it is a mental tiredness. My brain has to work 2 and 3 times harder than yours to do the same things. And so by 3, 4, 5 o'clock, if I haven't had a chance to rest and restore, my brain isn't going to be functioning as well. And so it's not going to be as able to interpret cues, or it's not going to be as able to, help me cope like it was at 10 a.m. that morning, right? So fresh air, daylight, getting adequate rest. And I also wanted to mention, I can't think of the name of it, maybe Jamison or Sharon, but especially in our northern states, I know a lot of times it's freezing, it's really hard to get out, or there's not a lot of sun, but there are lights that you can purchase that can mimic the daylight, right? And they could also help with it.
Great. Well, folks, that's the end of our hour. So I want to thank our panelists as well as our attendees for joining this webcast today. A few points I'd like to make. First, we will be making a recording of this webcast available in the next few days. For those that are participating in this webcast and registered, we will email you once all this information is available. We're hoping to have it ready before Thanksgiving. And so we will strive quickly to do this and get everything together for y'all. If you want a copy of this and the recording, we'll make that all available for you all. And it will all be located at elmcroft.com/empower, so pretty much where you registered. Second, plan to join us for the next Empower Hour. And this Empower Hour will be in January, and it will focus on how families access senior living and the affordability of senior living and the value that it offers. And then lastly, as you consider today's conversation, feel free to connect with one of our communities out there across the nation. All the folks working in those communities are specially trained to help talk with family caregivers like yourself. What might be on your mind after today's conversation, or questions that might come up. And you can find a community near you by going to elmcroft.com and typing in where you're looking. And we do have communities all across the country. So feel free to connect with them, because I know they talk with hundreds of people daily that are, again, walking in a path of caregiving just like you all are. So again, thank you very much for your time. Happy Thanksgiving. And we look forward to connecting with everyone in January. Thank you.
Take care. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.